Thank you very much, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank the government of Morocco for this very kind and illuminating invitation. And I think what I will say is very much related to what the two previous speakers said, but put in a different framework. In the context of the debate on international governance and of a possible Atlantic initiative, I would like to tackle one specific aspect. And I may sound a little bit philosophical, as academics often do, but I do think this has very practical implications. The question of the common identity or attachment that more universal categories, such as the community of humankind, or perhaps not that universal, a little bit less universal, but also others, allow for. In fact, one example of a common identity that has been built in the last years is representative here by the many citizens of the Portuguese language. The Portuguese-speaking nations that formed an organization some time ago may be, in a sense, not necessarily model, but an inspiration for this initiative, since these are exactly countries of the regions we are talking about, Africa, the Americas, and Europe. This question I wish to tackle has both ethical and operational implications. It is connected to an age-old issue of the tension between particular attachments, such as nationalism, and more universal attachments, such as the idea of the humankind. And is also connected to the issue of legitimacy, which is fundamental in the discussion of the functioning of governance institutions at all levels, whether they are international, regional, national, or local, as this morning Mr. Carlos Alvarez mentioned. This mobilization, the mobilization of resources, the need for acquiescence and public support are all known about and are fundamental for the efficient functioning of global governance institutions, and are closely dependent on the legitimacy of these same institutions. Every time a diplomat sits down to negotiate a treaty, a mechanism for policy coordination, or a specific conflict, he or she faces the issue of legitimacy and identity, as he or she will have to seek support for the norms, concessions, or even the discourse that is being negotiated. These issues have become a complex and crucial discussion as growing interdependence and the web of norms that organize our lives are generated and function at different levels of aggregation in the family, locally, nationally, transnationally, internationally. Current levels of global interconnectedness have posed the question of how norms and institutions can be constructed that will not only deal with the age-old question of how separate communities can coexist with the minimum use of force, but also solve the problems of satisfying basic needs of millions and protecting the physical environment. In this context, the problem of community arises. Is there a community of humankind? Can we talk of such a concept? In the West, at least, which is all I know about, the Renaissance at the dawn of modernity brought ample possibilities of new identities and new attachments, as humans acquired multiple new connections with the world. Nevertheless, the construction of the modern state generated a hierarchy of identities in which the national state and the national community became the prime identity and at the top of our list. The belief that security could not be defended in any other way was a principal reason for the triumph of the sovereign state over different forms of political association that competed at the time. Thus, the relationship between citizenship and humanity became a central problem widely debated by philosophers, social scientists, and politicians. Several trends developed in different time frames have enhanced our common and universal collective identity. And I would like to stress 4 of these. Of course, there are others. First, the development of international norms, and in particular international law, has produced a common framework for interaction, a common language, the possibility of negotiations of specific issues departing from a platform of previous agreed norms. This practice ties the world together, generating common beliefs that have become increasingly embedded in national and local cultures. It allows us to speak of an international society and of a certain measure of international order. We learn how to coexist with others in an orderly environment, not only to control competitors. In fact, Latin American countries in particular have greatly contributed to this aspect of our common identity since the 19th century, when newly independent countries were trying to protect their sovereignty from European powers unhappy with their loss of influence. International law has, of course, many different areas of application, both public and private. But I would like to stress that humanitarian law in particular plays a crucial role as one of the building blocks of our common identity, as it impinges upon one basic aspect of human life, the use of violence. The second trend, cooperation between states and governments on the international level, has generated overflows from more specific, often technical areas of cooperation and contact to more political and general areas. The creation of groups of people in constant contact with common language and common professional interests breaks down the national divisions and sometimes can be the beginning of ties between communities in conflict. Third trend, the transnational links between numerous different groups that have been a relevant feature of international relations since at least the 19th century, when transnational movements against slavery or women's rights changed the way societies were organized, also generated a notion of humanity and common destiny. This trend has, of course, been immensely enhanced by technological development in the field of telecommunications. Transnational solidarities and identities challenge the idea that state sovereignty and national identity are the dominant principles that organize our political lives. So in a sense, we go back to the potential, or some of the potentials, opened up at the dawn of modernity. And finally, the fourth trend I would like to stress is the development of a cosmopolitan harm convention, which had the more specific objective of protecting all persons from unnecessary pain and suffering, the idea that we can feel the pain and the suffering of others. The idea of avoiding unnecessary harm to any other person has developed as a basic human obligation, whereas the idea of common conception of good, regarding the idea of a common conception of good, there is, of course, more disagreement. These ideas are part of a longer history of the construction of an idea of common destiny, and sometimes it is framed as our common nature. This possible common identity has practical and ethical implications, allowing for the cultural basis of political legitimacy, which I started my talk with, fundamental for the development of international governance. If we are gearing towards a post-Westphalian era in the sense of surrendering crucial powers to sub-state or transnational political authorities is an open question. But it seems clear to me that public confidence in sovereign institutions has declined in recent times. Humane governance of global interconnectedness now and in the future will require stronger cosmopolitan moral orientations coupled with radical institutional innovations, which is, in a sense, what we're talking about here. But the existence of a web of international norms and the development of a common, more universal identity will mean pressure for greater participation in making decisions that affect wider groups of people. So legitimacy cannot come only from common identity. Participation is absolutely fundamental, and it has been mentioned before. The issue of the democratic deficit, widely debated regarding the institutions of the European Union, inevitably arises. Human beings will need to control more of their history if they are to understand their responsibilities and obligations regarding it. The contradiction between citizenship and humanity came to be regarded as a key ethical problem in international relations. Citizenship on a national basis allowed for the development of a sense of obligation and responsibility, and democratization of political processes connected obligation and participation, inclusion and responsibility. The extension of moral and political boundaries will demand new forms of political participation. A concentric circle image of duty can be imagined. The right balance between the universal and the particular will depend on the engagement of ever larger parts of the population in this process. Many previous speakers have spoken about the need for social and economic inclusion. But this will not be enough. Responsibility and obligations need to be accompanied by participation in decision-making processes and debates, even if the role of representative mechanisms is inevitable. Thank you very much.